I'm going to talk about a synchronicity that recently occurred to me, or appeared to me, and I talk about synchronicities a lot just because they fascinate me. The fact that they happen at all is fascinating, and the rapidity or the frequency with which they happen is quite fascinating. I don't know what it all means, but it's definitely a phenomenon. I recently rewatched the movie Chapter 27. This was a movie that came out in 2007. I don't think it had a very wide release. It might have basically gone straight to video. There was still video back then. Or straight to DVD. And the reason why it wasn't well received, I think, was largely because it was a movie that showed us the point of view of Mark David Chapman, the assassin of John Lennon. Jared Leto plays Mark David Chapman in this movie, and I've got to say, although I find Jared Leto to be a creep. He just creeps me out. I don't terribly like him, just from what I've seen of him. But I think he has some talent, and in this movie, he really just goes all in to the part. You know, he puts on weight, and he becomes this lard-ass everyman sort of person. Although I don't know if Mark David Chapman was really an everyman. He was a little bit off kilter. But the movie takes place over the 3 days in which, just before he assassinates Lennon. And it also features Lindsay Lohan, who in 2007 was not at the high point of her career either. So I think there was a lot of I think that generally speaking, this was seen as a movie that it was best to avoid. Sean Lennon and Yoko Ono both thought it was tasteless, and I think a lot of other people did too. Now, if that were my father, if my father had been assassinated, and somebody made a movie about the assassin, I don't think I would care for that either. But it doesn't make it not it doesn't push it into territory of stuff that you're not supposed to make a movie about or write a book about or whatever. I don't think the very act of making this movie was tasteless. But the movie's, I think, pretty good, and Jared Leto is, I think, very good in the part. It shows Chapman, of course, not in any kind of conspiratorial light. There are, in retrospect, a lot of things about the assassination of John Lennon that make one raise one's eyebrows. The fact that Chapman was so influenced by Catcher in the Rye, which also wound up influencing John Hinckley, supposedly, or maybe it was part of his programming. It's been suggested that Catcher in the Rye kind of functions that way for some assassins who it's part of their brainwashing process, and Chapman was definitely obsessed with Catcher in the Rye, and supposedly he developed this hatred of, or this resentment of John Lennon after initially being a big fan of his, because like Holden Caulfield talks about in Catcher in the Rye, he becomes a phony. John Lennon had become a phony. He'd turned his back on his fans. He was just living the high life, and this is a man who claimed to care about peace and love and that kind of thing. And Chapman grew to despise him when he came to the conclusion that Lennon was not truly what he made himself out to be, that he was a phony. So there's nothing in the movie that is that suggests conspiracy, but there are a lot of things a lot of questions that, if you watch the movie, it leaves you wondering about. Number one, and this is where the synchronicity comes in with current events. Number one, Mark David Chapman is shown flying back and forth from Hawaii to New York. He apparently, I mean, who's paying who's paying, who's kicking in this money? It's never explained. Chapman is definitely not somebody who was prosperous. He wasn't somebody who held down a job in any discernible way, and yet he traveled the world. And it's discussed how both he and Hinckley were involved with this supposed Christian evangelical service called Vision, I think. Vision International. I'm not sure if that's the exact name, but it's something relating to vision. You can look this up. And that this was a front. This was often used as a front for CIA activity. So there is the question. This is the big thing. The big question that you should, one is prompted to ask oneself when watching Chapter 27. You wonder what's this guy? I mean, how is he able to afford lodging in New York City? I mean, of course, in 1980, it wasn't as expensive as it is now, but he was still staying in. He was at the YMCA, staying at the YMCA first, where I stayed in New York City when I was there. But even the YMCA isn't cheap. It's just cheaper than what it costs to stay at a regular hotel or motel. But he checks out of the YMCA because there's so much homosexual activity there, and he hates it. He can't stand it. He can't stand hearing gay sex all around him. So he goes and checks into this fairly nice hotel. Also ends up purchasing an escort for the evening. In New York City, I don't think that's cheap. And he's just sort of wandering around. He's just a loafer. He's just wandering around. He's hanging out outside of the Dakota, which the last time I was in New York, I visited the Dakota, recorded a video about the Dakota building, where Lennon and Yoko Ono and Sean Lennon lived. It's this, very upscale place where a lot of celebrities live. or lived, and I think still live. And he just spent a lot of his time hanging out there, and he strikes up a conversation with a couple of John Lennon groupies, and one of them is friendly enough to give him a chance, even though his personality is he's kind of weird and kind of off-putting. But the Lindsay Lohan character is nice and consents to let him buy her lunch. And he also purchases she suggests that he buys the double fantasy album so that he can get John Lennon to sign it. So he's in New York and he, it's not like he saved up all his money for this one chance to see New York, to fly in all the way from Hawaii. He had been to New York, flown back to Hawaii, and then flew to New York again. And yet there doesn't seem to be any problem with, he doesn't seem to be worried about budgetary issues. So that's quite strange. And the same question has arisen for me when I think about Ryan Routh and how he's traveling around. Curiously enough, also currently his current residence, well, not his current residence. His current residence is jail, but the place he was last reported as residing was Hawaii. So he's flown, and just like Chapman, he talks in one of his interviews about going around the world trying to recruit people for the Ukraine cause. And he is at least traveling from Hawaii to Ukraine, and also spending some time, dressing in a suit and tie and lobbying for the cause in Washington, D.C. So, again, maybe this guy's independently wealthy and I just don't know about it, but it seems strange that I would want to know how he can afford to do, because if I wanted to go, if I believe strongly in the Ukraine cause and wanted to become a recruiter for Ukraine, I don't think that they would take me, and they definitely wouldn't take me if I just had to pay my own way, because I wouldn't be able to pay my own way. So, and I think the same could apply for you, and yet somehow, for some reason, they were able, or they were willing to bring this guy over and let him do this kind of recruiting, and he was in a high-profile enough position that major media was talking to him. Newsweek was talking to him, New York Times, Financial Times. There's lots of interviews with him that are out there before he became the alleged second attempted assassin, the alleged second assassin, attempter. It's awkward. Allegedly the second person to attempt to assassinate Donald Trump. So, lots of parallels between Chapman and Routh. And it's widely thought that Chapman was a CIA asset. What adds to the suspiciousness of Chapman is the fact that the doorman working at the Dakota building at the time when Lennon was shot was somebody who had was a Cuban who had taken part in the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion. And that was a CIA effort. So again, like a lot of other things, it's not a smoking gun, but it's strange. And you're not wrong. One is not wrong to think that it's strange and to take notice of it and to ask, what's the significance of this? And I don't think, it's just a coincidence, or it doesn't really matter, or all the kind of people who try to talk you out of it and try to convince you that you're just deluded for even thinking along those lines. It really is, as they say, gaslighting. I'm loath to use that term. It's such an emotionally loaded term. I try to be logical in my assessments of things, and to avoid terminology that is emotionally weighted. But it really is. They're trying to convince you that there's something wrong with you for thinking that way, and there isn't. In fact, there's something wrong with them for not pondering these things, and for just thinking that, these something like that, a detail like that, is surely a matter of no consequence, and I needn't pay any attention at all to that. Only a crazy person would take note of such a thing. Yeah. So some interesting parallels there. That's all I got to say.